Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this roundtable on boosting the EU Green Deal initiatives on buildings with fire resilience. We will focus on the EU Green Deal and its initiative on buildings and see how fire resilience can enhance its impacts. My name is Jérôme Andolfato. I am Fire Safety Europe Public Affairs Senior Executive. We gather fire safety experts, association, international company, academics, and our mission is to improve fire safety in buildings for people and society. Our hosts today are MEP Pietikäinen and MEP Fajon. Thanks so much for being with us today. Both of them have been really active on fire safety since the beginning of their mandates. So it's a pleasure for us to have them with us today. Unfortunately, MEP Weiss is unable to attend due to last-minute change of schedule. So Mrs Dyrboel will be presenting on the Renovation Wave for us today. Presenting today, we also have two experts, Mr Jaanisoo and Professor McNamee. But before we get started, a little housekeeping. Everyone is muted throughout the roundtable. If you have any question, please go ahead and type them into the Q&A box in the Zoom control panel. We will address them later during the roundtable. If you want to tweet, please do so. The hashtag is building fire resilience and the webinar is recorded, so you will receive the replay of the webinar later on. All these rules have been posted into the chat box. So now, without further ado, I leave the floor to MEP Fajon for our opening speech.
Thank you very much, Jérôme. Thank you to all co-organizers from Fire Safe Europe, of course, my dear colleagues from the European Parliament and all our advisors who are with us, everyone who is following also the debate online on boosting the EU Green Deal initiatives on building with fire resilience. Firstly, I would like to welcome you all on this remote yet very important panel discussion. It would be definitely better and more pleasant to meet in person and host this event in the European Parliament as we were planning at the beginning, but as I already said a few times, hosting remote panels and talks, thanks to today's technology, we can still address all the important topics without a delay. And fire resilience and fire safety definitely is a very important topic we need to address. So once again, thank you to the Fire Safe Europe for approaching and proposing on holding this event, as well as a big thanks to all of my colleagues in the European Parliament. Now, back to the topic, I find having this discussion today very important to highlight and raise especially the awareness of fire resilient, fire safe buildings that have the capacity to resist, to adapt and to recover from a fire and resume to its essential functions in a very timely and efficient fashion. Fire safety is a very important part of sustainable construction, which is becoming the mainstream of construction throughout the whole Europe today. Over the years, we have, of course, witnessed many catastrophes all around the world. Just remember, for example, the London case, where back in 2017, more than 70 people lost their lives in a burning Grenfell Tower, fire caused by freezers spread rapidly to the flammable cladding and installed on Grenfell Tower in a recent renovation. Let us also not forget that both the cladding and insulation on the outside of the building failed all preliminary tests by the police. I'm coming from Slovenia, and I do remember a case happened back in May 2017, where the warehouse of the company Chemis in Vrhnica, which stored hazardous waste, caught fire, and 250 firefighters were needed to extinguish the fire. 2 of them needed medical attention for smoke inhalation, and a lot suffered different health problems. Not to mention that the environment damage was really huge, and there were a lot of consequences still afterwards. These and similar cases that are happening all around Europe and the world indeed raised awareness of the importance of fire safety, but do we really have all the experiences we need to prevent all these catastrophes, to realize also the importance of fire safety? In practice, we still too often witness where the lower price of materials or workmanship outweighs the aspect of fire safety. And this must not be happening. This we have to prevent. And because the price of building fires is too big and too devastating for the people and the environment, we have really to join forces to do everything that is in our power. Also, we are speaking about the pollution and destruction that is triggered by building fires can everything truly disrupt our community's life. Impending transport and mobility, closing schools down, business, public offices, bringing life to a standstill or rushing us to find coping mechanisms. In November 2014, the fire destroyed a whole food processing factory in Spain, left 1,000 families depending on their work in the installations in a very critical situation. All of this brings us also to indirect impacts on our economies. The economic impact of building fires can be very severe, from business closure, financial loss, job loss, each taking a substantial toll on people. And the total economic costs of fires amount today approximately 1% of GDP in most advanced countries, which is a lot. Having mentioned all that, fire safety has on the other hand the potential to boost sustainability, yet it has sometimes been omitted in the journey towards a more sustainable future. There is a strong desire for constructing and renovating more sustainable buildings, which led to the introduction of new materials and technologies, and it is essential to evaluate the potential fire risks associated with these new elements, especially concerning flammability and toxicity. I'm therefore very happy that the resources that Europe will devote to energy renovations in the coming years in the new financial framework are high, and we must ensure that renovations are carried out in a way that also improves the fire safety of our buildings. Otherwise, the investment efficiency will be only partial. It is important also that the fire safety starts with awareness rising among our population, where the European community has a crucial role to play. And the EU Green Deal that is on the table, which with its emphasis on fire safety, it's the basis for more decisive steps in this area. As we know from practice that we can start many positive trends in Brussels on various fields. Last but not least, the quality of living is becoming an increasingly important element of our everyday life, and we must be aware that one of the criteria for quality living is also safety, and within it is extremely important fire safety. Now we are in the COVID-19 crisis. There will be also a post-COVID life. And this crisis has shown us more than ever the importance of living in healthy and safe environment, also in safe buildings, as many of us transitioned to working remotely from our offices or from our homes and spend a substantial time inside in our buildings. It's therefore very important that the European Union and the Commission, all the relevant institutions and member states, of course, seize these opportunities to ensure fire safety and fire resilience are reflected in all relevant legislation and regulation, starting with the insertion of fire resilience in national long-term renovation strategy. We all carry this responsibility, and it's a very, very big one. So let me finish my opening remarks with sincerely thanking to all the firefighters out there who are heroically, sacrificially, and bravely saving many, many lives putting fire and flames. Thank you very much, and I am passing the floor to our panelists and experts in the field of building fire safety, and looking forward to our discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, MEP Fajon, for setting the stage for us and for giving us an insight on fire in the European Union and also on the importance of including fire safety when we move forward with the different EU Green Deal initiative. So now the next presentation will more specifically focus on green technology and fire safety. Our presenter for this presentation is Professor Margaret McNamee. She is Professor of Fire Safety Engineering at Lund University in Sweden. She has technical expertise in understanding and characterizing the environmental impacts of fires, as well as in fire and combustion. She has more than 100 international publications, and she is active in the International Association of Fire Safety Science, and she was the first author of their Agenda 2030. So now, Margaret, the floor is yours for your presentation. Thank you.
I will be speaking today about fire safety and green technologies in light of our common efforts to a sustainable built environment. A couple of years ago, Dodge Data and Analytics issued a report on world green building trends, indicating that the majority of new structures are expected to be green by 2021. This is a very positive development, particularly when coupled to the fact that many renovated buildings are increasingly incorporating green technology as part of their renovation. And as we all know, the vast majority of our built environment is comprised of existing buildings rather than new buildings. But we also know that there are fire safety implications of the materials, building technologies, building practices and systems that we choose to use both in renovations and in new buildings. And it's no less important to ensure that green technology is safe when looking through the lens of sustainability than it is to ensure that it is sustainable, as I hope that you will become clear throughout this presentation. We need to consider what are the implications for fire safety of our choices, and how do we ensure that structures that are built today and tomorrow, together with our existing built environment or heritage buildings, are sustainable and safe. So let's start by considering sustainability itself. According to the Brundtland Commission, a sustainable society meets our present needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. When I first started doing research in fire safety and sustainability some 3 decades ago, sustainability was often seen to be synonymous with environmentally friendly. Today, we usually associate sustainability with 3 main dimensions that you see on the figure on this slide. That is economic, ecological, and social sustainability. Now, many words can be associated with these different dimensions, as you can see coming onto the picture here. But most importantly, perhaps, we need to remember that in order for a building to be seen as viable, it needs to be both economically and ecologically stable. In order for it to be equitable, it needs to be both economically and socially stable. And in order for it to be bearable, it needs to be ecologically and socially sustainable. But in order for us to understand sustainability and all 3 of these different dimensions of sustainability, then we need tools and we need to start thinking in a holistic manner. So there are ways for us to incorporate holistic thinking into the development of green systems and technologies. But it's important for us not just to be thinking of one of these dimensions, but to be thinking, in fact, of all 3 of the dimensions. On this slide, you can see a number of different methodologies or methods that we use today in order to be able to try and, in a structured manner, think holistically when we're developing sustainable buildings from all of the 3 different dimensions. For ecological sustainability, it can be life cycle assessment. From economic sustainability, we might use something called life cycle costing. And from social sustainability, we might use something called social life cycle assessment. And then we try and build them all together into an overarching tool that you might call something like life cycle sustainability assessment. But one of the problems that we have with all of these different tools is the fact that often they assume that the building or the product or whatever is being investigated has an accident-free life cycle. And so we don't build into the models an understanding of the fact that fires in themselves may have an impact on the overall sustainability of the system that we're studying. And while there's been some research, certainly I've been doing some research in this field, and there've been some others doing some research in this field, there's still more work to be done. So we might ask ourselves then, how do fires impact on the environment? The figure that you see on this picture is from a recently published report where I led a project where we were putting together an understanding of identifying what are the research needs in this area. And we can see at the center of the figure is fire. And fire can impact on the environment, both in terms of emissions to fire gases, runoff water, for example, due to extinguishing activities, and also debris. So that means that emissions can be to the air, water, and soil. And the impact of the emissions depend both on the temporal and geographical context of the emissions, and also on the susceptibility of the recipient. But in order for us to understand how fires might impact on sustainability for green buildings, I think we need to start by also understanding what do we mean by green buildings. If we start by defining that by a green building, we mean the building that in its design, construction, or operation reduces or eliminates negative impacts, then we also need to acknowledge the fact that green buildings are not just buildings that have green certification, but green buildings that try in some way to incorporate sustainability holistic types of thinking. So on this figure here, you see three different pictures which show some of the different types of attributes that we might expect to be associated with green buildings. On one figure, up to at the top left-hand side, then we can see green roofs, which are a common attribute associated with green buildings. On the top to the left, and on the top to the right, we see an atrium, which in a green building would use natural lighting, perhaps natural ventilation, in order to reduce the energy costs of a green building. And down the bottom, you can see an array of photovoltaic cells on a roof, which can also be used in order to have good energy production from renewable sources in a green building. So in that context, when we know what we're dealing with a green building and green technologies, then we need to try and understand what are the fire safety challenges associated with green technologies and green buildings. So recently, Brian Meacham and myself completed a study where we identified more than 100 different materials, systems, and features and grouped them into 9 different categories that are typical or could be associated with green buildings. And then for each of those categories, we tried to identify what are the fire safety challenges that we either know about or we suspect may exist, but more knowledge is needed in order for us to be able to fully understand them. And so when we went through these 100 different attributes associated with green buildings, whether or not they are a fully green building or a green technology within, say, a renovated structure, then we were able to identify these particular challenges. To begin with, there is the potential for competing objectives when we're working with sustainability and fire safety. And while the big building regulatory system, building codes, fire codes, electrical codes and standards and so on, do try and consider both sustainability and fire safety in some cases, they are not always able to do so very well. So there is a potential for fire hazards and risks that can result as due to the introduction of new materials, systems and features for which the fire performance may not be well understood, especially in the case of complex systems. And the picture that you see on this slide is the Grenfell Tower fire, which was mentioned by MEP Fajon as part of the introduction, and is one example where we do have a complex system which was being used and did not perform well in the case of exposure to a fire. So unfortunately, we're also seeing that some extra regulatory mechanisms, for example, rating schemes, may actually inadvertently introduce unintended fire risks or hazards due to the fact that they're expecting regulatory systems to pick up the safety slack, but they're often too slow to be able to do so well. Therefore, there is a need for us to ensure that green buildings are also fire resilient as a part of creating a fire safe and sustainable building. So in terms of the fire resilience of buildings, that means essentially the ability to prepare for, absorb, recover from, and more successfully adapt to fire events. And in the figure here, you see a fairly traditional depiction of what resiliency means. So in this case, you would see the functionality on the y-axis. And if you have a perturbation occurring at this point, for example, in the building life cycle, an event occurs which causes a rapid reduction of the functionality of the building. If the building is resilient, then it could hopefully rapidly be able to recover and come back to a high level of functionality. But if it is not resilient, then you would expect either an entire loss of functionality, for example, in the case of a building burning down, or it taking a considerable amount of time for that resiliency to be recovered, or that functionality to be recovered. And so I would say that there is a need for both sustainable and fire resilient buildings. So buildings should be sustainable and fire resilient, and a building that burns down is actually neither sustainable nor fire resilient. So we need to include both our understanding of sustainability and our understanding of resiliency in order to be able to create truly fire safe and resilient buildings. This can be pictured in this way, where a sustainable and fire resilient building, or as I like to call it, a safer building, is one that is able to achieve sustainability targets and resiliency targets for fire events. So finally, sustainability and resiliency are different, but they are equally important concepts, and they should both be considered in building design. In some cases, we see that there can be a potential for competing objectives, but these do need to be managed. We can't just from a sustainability point of view say that the regulators need to be dealing with the safety issues. And from the safety point of view, we can't just be saying that extra regulatory activities need to be dealing with sustainability. I think it's important that we embrace the multifaceted nature of sustainability and resiliency, because there are a lot of opportunities there as well for innovation and for new ways of creating a more sustainable future. And in order to try and embrace that multifaceted nature, Brian Meacham and myself have developed what we like to call a risk tetrahedron for green buildings. And this incorporates an understanding of both risk and performance, of societal objectives, of control mechanisms, together with a full understanding of building attributes such as features, materials, and systems. And by incorporating all of those different facets, we can help to actually create a truly sustainable built environment for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret, for this enlightening presentation on the way to a sustainable and fire self-built environment. So the next presentation will focus on the renovation wave and specifically on the fact that it's an opportunity to insert fire safety to ensure our EU building stock is truly sustainable. So the speaker for this presentation is Susanne Dyrboel. She is the Public Affairs Director of Regulatory Affairs at Rockwool Group. She has worked on building energy efficiency, on fire safety and climate regulation, and her background is in construction engineering, and she holds a PhD in engineering research and development. So now I will leave the floor to Susanne to give you her remarks on the renovation wave and fire safety. The floor is yours, Susanne.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. So I promised to give a few short remarks on the renovation wave. First of all, since the renovation wave was announced first time as part of the Green Deal, it's interesting to see that the European climate ambition for 2030 now has been increased from 40% to 55% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And when looking into the impact assessment behind this increased climate ambition, it's clear that buildings are delivered or is delivered to expected to deliver a major share of the savings to reach this climate ambition. So it also means that from the first objective of the renovation wave, where it was expected to deliver a doubling of the renovation wave, we now need to have the ambition level to match the new climate ambition in Europe. So we will expect to see much more effort to drive the renovation rate, but also the depth of renovation. And if we look at the current level of renovation rate, it's only around 1%, where it's much less if we aim at deep renovation. So clearly there's a huge renovation challenge in Europe. It's around 3/4 of the building stock, which is inefficient today. And we expect that almost 80% of the buildings we have today will also be in use in 2050. So it's extremely important that we get it right if we want to make a success out of the green transition and the renovation wave. So the proposal for the renovation wave is expected to come out in October. And we expect that it will be outlining concrete actions, both in forms of non-legislative and legislative measures. And one of the items which have been mentioned in the impact assessment will be to have a targeted revision of the energy performance of buildings directive, which we should expect to see next year. And see if I can go to the next. Yeah, so on top of the renovation wave, it's also relevant to pay attention to the new EU budget. So it's not only that we need to get it right from a sustainable point of view, but we can also see that there will be a lot of money which will go into renovation in the coming years. So the total budget, it has been increased with 2/3 due to the renovation fund coming in and the whole recovery discussion. But at the same time, it's also the share of the budget which will be reserved for green investment has been increased. So member states are expected to be using 30% of the total budget and 37% of the recovery facility for green investments. And if we just assume that those money will be distributed based on the sector's share of the greenhouse gas emissions, we would expect that around 1/3 of this budget should go for renovating the building stock. And just looking at the recovery fund, and assuming this distribution, it will be 100 billion which will come from the recovery fund. And those money will have to be committed by end of 2023 and have to be spent before 2026. And when investing public money into renovation, we need to be sure that we are spending the money in a right way and responsible way, not at least. So the overall objective for the Renovation Wave, it is to help the EU to achieve a net climate neutral economy. And it's also to help create a clear priority for green investments in the building sector to secure a digital and fair recovery. We expect that renovation of both public and private buildings will be a key priority in the Renovation Wave, and also that there will be a special focus on renovating the worst performing buildings and addressing energy poverty. Those are the same focus areas which the member states were also asked to prioritize and address in their national renovation strategies from the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. So when focusing on renovation of worst performing buildings, we have a social responsibility to take care of fire safety, especially when renovating the homes for the most vulnerable people in the society. So we need to take care that while we are solving one problem, we are not creating another problem for the future. So we really need to be careful that there is no room for making trade-offs between fire safety and improved energy efficiency in the Renovation Wave. And we know it's costly if it's not done from the beginning. We have the case from UK with the Grenfell. And on top of the human tragedy, we now see that the cost estimated for replacing unsafe fire solutions after Grenfell in similar buildings, it is expected to increase more than 5 billion UK pound. So it's very, very costly not to do it right from the beginning. And just a comment about recent fires. I think it's also worth paying attention to the development we have seen since 1990, where we have had an increasing number of large facade fires worldwide. And in this number of fires shown here, 1/3 of the fires have happened in the EU. In the recent years, it was also mentioned by Ms Fajon in the beginning that we have also seen fires in newly renovated buildings. So it is an area which needs to be addressed and taken care of. And especially standing in front of a renovation wave, and where we are going to renovate a lot of buildings where people most likely will be staying in their building or in their home during the renovation, we should not forget also to consider fire safety during the construction work. So just a final or nearly final remark. I think it's very pleasant to see that the European Parliament, in their own initiative report on the energy efficiency potential in the EU's building stock, also acknowledged the importance of addressing fire safety together with energy efficient renovation. And we need to make sure in this way to use the renovation wave as an opportunity for Europe to support both deep renovation and fire safe renovation in one go. So despite fire safety might seem as a major or a minor issue compared to climate change and poor air quality, high energy cost and energy poverty, we need to get it right if we want to make a success of the green transition and the renovation wave. And Fire Safe Europe have come up with 4 recommendations for the renovation wave. So first of all, we need to make sure that financial incentives account for both energy efficiency and fire safety at the same time. And we need to take a special care for fire safety and fire resilience when renovating the worst performing buildings. Finally, we also need to encourage use of sustainable and fire resilient building materials when renovating. And finally, we need to carefully assess fire risk of new technologies and materials. Thank you. That was my comments.
Thank you, Mrs. Dyrboel, for this presentation, giving us insight on the renovation wave and for highlighting how important it is to include fire safety to really ensure holistic renovations. So the next presentation will focus on the Energy Buildings Performance Directive, whose implementation is also part of the EU Green Deal. And for that, we have an expert from Estonia, Mr. Jaanisoo, who will specifically focus on the implementation of the EPBD in Estonia and its fire safety provision. So Mr. Jaanisoo is the head of the Construction and Housing Department of the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Communications of Estonia. He's responsible for construction regulations, sustainable construction, as well as construction's energy efficiency and digitalization. His background is in prefabricated construction design and construction management. And today he's representing his ministry, whose areas of activity include the construction and housing sector, the energy sector, and the internal market of the European Union. So now, Mr. Jaanisoo, I leave the floor to you for your presentation and for some insight from Estonia.
Thank you very much, Jermaine, for a very thorough introduction. Dear members of parliament, dear listeners, I will provide you a short overview of Estonian take on the EPBD, on the renovation wave, on fire safety. I have to provide you information about how the construction procedures at the authority level are made to put those different topics together. So there will be quite a good run through of how we do things in Estonia. So first of all, construction as a topic in the policy making level is rather scattered between different ministries, but it's still very efficient in our experience, as the communication is key. So we do quite a lot of cooperation together with the Ministry of Interior. Here in the bottom, Ministry of Interior is responsible for fire safety in Estonia, including fire safety of buildings. And as Jermaine introduced me, responsible for construction and housing in general. So it's about collaboration again, how to get good holistic solutions for both energy efficiency and fire safety as well. So a little bit about my department. Our topics are quite various. We deal with sustainable construction, for instance, EPBD is here. Then also construction productivity and safety. Here we're responsible for keeping the building code, improving it. Building code is very much, let's say, related to Fire Safety Act. But as I said, Ministry of Interior is responsible for the Fire Safety Act. And then housing, where long-term renovation strategy is being carefully maintained and put into practice. And eventually, but not least, digital construction, where we are currently working with e-construction portal and connected services to really go forward with digitalization of construction. The public sector cannot stop the progress of the private sector, therefore we have to be at the same level. Some examples of Estonian construction. On the left side, it's tallest timber building of the world in 2016 and 15. The race is quick. There are now even taller timber buildings. Estonian manufacturer provided modules into this building, and the building is passive house. It's completely fire safe. I think it's a very good example of innovation from Estonia. On the right side, it's what used to be a very ugly old Soviet building block, which is now renovated to nearly zero energy building level of new buildings. So it's very similar to actually new building performance, and it's made possible by prefabricated elements, which included in the factory the insulation, the facade panels, the windows, ventilation pipes, and so on. So we really have to innovate to go forward with the challenges that we're facing. A little bit about energy performance of buildings. Energy efficiency of buildings in Estonia is a quite recent topic. Therefore, we don't have too much legacy of old requirements. First time it came into Estonian regulation was 2008. So a little bit more than 10 years we're dealing with this. So we managed to start with a very fresh and new and efficient take on the energy efficiency. Of course, we're transposing all the directives, but we're trying to do it in a smart way so that we wouldn't block ourselves unnecessarily. And one example here is the EPC, the Energy Performance Certificate system that we have in Estonia. The core of energy efficiency verification and control is the energy performance value. And this is the most important. How we do it, which kind of U values you use in a wall or roof or windows or whatnot. This is up to the architects, up to the engineers to figure out based on each building. So this is a completely performance-based regulation. It works very well. We are improving it all the time. But I would really like to stress this importance of performance-based design instead of prescriptive design to spur innovation. So to now put things together, the EPC control and fire safety control, we have to look a little bit how the building permit procedure works, or state supervision and control in general. The EPCs are checked at the building permit procedure level. So when building permit application is handed in, then the EPC is included in that, and the authorities will look into that. And the EPC will be looked again when there are major changes in the design documentation during the use and occupation permit procedure. When building is ready, then the EPC information will be provided at transactions, exactly as this is also written in the EPBD. Fire safety is more of a holistic thing. Rescue board is always being consulted with. They have to validate the design documents, and they are also making the state supervision of fire safety. And of course, there are many measures according to the situation how to make sure that the buildings are fire safe. But a little bit about the procedures itself, how it works technically. It's completely digital, already 4 years now. The application is handed into the register of buildings. This will be then on the table of local municipalities, and local municipalities then discuss with specific government organizations such as Rescue Board, who is responsible for fire safety, and then the fire performances of buildings will be verified, and the building permits and use permits will be given out. And this digital communication is also improved currently in Estonia. One example how we improve this. This is by BIM-based compliance checks. We have made a proof of concept already. It includes also some fire performance controls. One of them is evacuation route length, for instance. By next year, we will go live with a full version of BIM-based compliance checks, which includes, among others, the checks of building area, height, designed user amount, fire safety class, fire partitions, REI values, and so on. So even if we have these prescriptive regulations in our fire norms, we have to make sure that the authorities will not, let's say, confuse themselves with very simple checks. The very simple checks can be made by computer, and here we're tapping into the possibilities of artificial intelligence. Here on the right side, on the photo, you see the red and green areas. The red areas is where there's not enough distance to the evacuation route. Therefore, this BIM model has to be changed somehow to get enough short distance enough to the evacuation routes. A little bit about long-term renovation strategy as well. The volumes should be increasing 5-fold from today to the next 20 years. This is a huge challenge, but there are, of course, certain possibilities to do that, financial possibilities and also know-how. Why there is such a bulge there in 20 years is because of exactly the Soviet era housing, the post-World War II era, when most of the housing was constructed, and also other buildings. And we see on the right side that the EPC performance is also rather low of this building. And what I would really like to stress here is the regional aspect, that in very many areas of declining population, there is not enough new apartment buildings or renovated apartment buildings coming to the market. And that means that the quality of dwellings is decreasing year by year. And this is not only an energy efficiency problem, it's also a safety problem, certainly a fire safety problem. I will go over this updated fire regulation. What I want to stress here is that we, in 2017, we introduced a more specific regulation for providing analytical evidence as proof of fire safety. And this is also a little bit similar to this energy performance value aspect, that it's completely performance-based regulation. So if you cannot verify fire performance of a building within the regulation, then a competent engineer can use analytical evidence to prove that. Of course, yes, in renovation, there are certain safety challenges. What I want to point out in Estonia is the problem with gas heating appliances. They're often burn out, broken, leaking. There is poor air circulation, not enough CO sensors in the dwellings. When we provide grants, loan guarantees to buildings for renovation, then it's also a condition that these gas heating appliances have to be replaced with new heating systems. We're very, we believe into deep renovation in a very deep level, so to speak. We have to make sure that the indoor quality is good, that not only, let's say, not only the building envelope, but also a central ventilation system must be installed, so that there wouldn't be a plastic bag effect. And of course, there are other fire issues that can be remedied through renovation, and this is what in Estonia we promote via our grants and other support systems. So let's innovate and automate. I think these coming challenges need innovative thinking. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jaanisoo, for this presentation showing how it's possible to increase energy efficiency and at the same time improve fire safety. So I'll give the floor to you for your key takeaways from the roundtable, and then we will proceed to the Q&A. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and a special thank you for all the organizers of raising up the topic. And I hope that this would be the first on the series of discussion what comes to sustainable buildings in various aspects, because this is indeed what we need. And a couple of the key takeaways from this discussion and from the challenge, and I'll sort of try to categorize them, and maybe then we can come back them on Q&As, but certainly on later stages. Firstly, my point is that we probably would need a new type of a regulation in EU, be it buildings regulation or sustainable buildings regulation. Because our approach, what we are doing momentarily with materials, fire safety, sustainability, energy efficiency, is leaving areas untouched. It is sometimes difficult to fit it together, and it doesn't seem to be effective enough for me. So I hope that this could be one sort of a outcome and key takeaway that we would all start considering from our with our sort of a groups and discussions, whether this would be the approach. And what to take then into account? It would need to be holistic, and it would need to be backcasting. We all know that all the constructions are very long living, and so actually we are building now constructions and buildings that are going to hopefully stay up at least 30 years, so beyond our carbon neutrality target. And actually 80% of the buildings that exist today is going to be the building. The 80% of the buildings in 2050 are going to be the buildings that exist already today, and they are going to be renovated. So we need to have a plan that actually tells that when you renovate and then when you build, how do you ensure that the building is future-proof, tested, and it is fit for the future, so that it is fire safe. And it concerns a lot of the challenges we've heard already earlier on, and also during this discussion, and we are going to have also with the new materials in the future. And with this fire safety aspect, I would like to draw your attention to one special question that is discussed on the fringes, but not so much in the mainstream. And this is the chemicalization of the buildings. And I've learned with various discussions that actually flame retardants are not so good and effective as we think. Because it might be the case that the toxic fumes are more deadly for people in the building than the actual fire can be. And we all know that actually flame retardants is one of the biggest and most serious sources of endocrine disruptors and seriously harming our health. So we would need to see in the future how to get rid of the flame retardants and compensate that aspect with safer and better construction materials, plus then the compulsory extinguishing mist extinguishing systems, so that you wouldn't destroy the whole building in case of fire alarm. And while we have the technologies, let's take them, let's put them on a compulsory basis on place on public and private buildings, at least up to certain scale, and then as a recommendation for private homes in the future. And let's see what we have learned and what is the best scientific and up-to-date the knowledge of the fire safety of the area and practitioners, what we would need to take into account, especially in construction of public spaces and high rises. And there really is a lot to be done, and I won't consume your time too much on going in detail. Okay, this fire safety. Second is human health. And this means a compulsory metering system of the indoor air quality that goes for the humidity, CO2 levels, that goes to different kind of chemical toxic continents. And that way, by the way, the construction materials should be less harmful and non-toxic in the future. And that should be taken into account in the renovation. And that should be sort of linked then the metering systems on air conditioning requirements. And this is especially, of course, the big public buildings, but also the bigger housing constructions. So you need to put both fire safety, that is part of the human health and security, and other human health, the indoor air quality issues there. And it needs to be EU regulation. And third aspect is, of course, then the energy efficiency, where you would need to have this kind of a backcasting approach that make a deep renovation, where you take into account the two other latter aspects, what I mentioned, but also the climate neutrality, so that all buildings where possible would be climate positive and energy positive in the future. That means that upscale then in deep renovation on the level, not this kind of a superficial energy efficiency targets, but when you do it properly and have a longer period for building owners to fulfill the targets. And then it is the other sustainability elements, and this is the modularity, the Lego building, the how you can reuse the different parts of the building, and how you can design it so that you avoid the waste. Basically, the building should be totally recyclable in the future. And then, of course, another story I won't go dwell right now is what you do with the legacy. That is the old buildings where you have quite a number of different kind of issues, and the rules are quite different. So we see there's quite a work ahead of us, but we do have the Commission initiative of sustainable buildings coming. We have a lot of information. We have wonderful specialty in Europe. So my hope for you is just that let's do it and let's work together and rely, and I do rely on your competence and support on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Pietikäinen, for this comprehensive closing of the roundtable. So now we will move forward to the Q&A session. So I was talking to Mr. Jaanisoo a bit earlier, and we would like to know, in terms of implementation of a PBD in Estonia, what have been really the key measures to remove the different barriers that might have been preventing renovating buildings in terms of energy efficiency and fire safety beforehand?
Then I have to thank you for the question. I have to provide a little bit of context. Thanks to the European funds, thanks to our political will, the financial instruments, also grants to renovation have about 10 years of history. And throughout these 10 years, we have continuously improved both the technological conditions, also the instruments themselves financially, and also communication. So I think it's a step-by-step process. I cannot point out any certain breakthroughs. It's just building trust in the market. In our situation of fragmented ownership, every household owns their apartment, or the share is very high. The trust is the key here. So we have our own implementing body called CREDEX, which is now known and famous for providing help in building renovation, and this is really important. So up to now, we have, in those 10 years, we have renovated about 1,100 buildings, but by 2050, about 14,000 apartment buildings need to be renovated. So yes, we have to speed up.
Thank you for your answer, Mr. Jaanisoo. So now we have a question for Margaret, but other panelists are welcome to answer afterwards, from Thomas Muhel. He says, dear Margaret, you mentioned the different types of emissions in the event of building fire. Do you have data showing that fire events are a significant or at least noteworthy source of CO2 emissions? And thanks for your answer.
Thank you, and thank you, Thomas, for your question. I mean, there is data available concerning emissions from different types of fires, and certainly if we're looking at a single building fire, then there are significant other types of anthropogenic sources of carbon dioxide emissions, for example, which are much higher than the individual building. Than a fire in the individual building. But if we look at fire emissions in general, and from, say, all fires that occur in the built environment over a full year, then yes, they are a very significant source of some emissions. And if we look at beyond the built environment to the unbuilt environment, then they are very significant sources of emissions from, say, wildland fires and things like that. So fire emissions and fire impact on the environment is a significant source of different types of emissions.
Thank you, Professor McNamee.
I should say as well, one of the references that I put into the presentation is actually to a report which summarizes what we know today about emissions from fires to the environment. So it's an update of some work that was done previously, and this report was just presented at the beginning of this year. So it can be downloaded from the National Fire Protection Research Foundation website.
Thank you. So I believe MEP Pietikäinen is still with us. MEP Fajon had to leave, but if MEP Pietikäinen is still here, and also to the other panelists, but we would like to ask, how could the EU ensure that through the EU Green Deal and its initiatives on buildings, the inequalities between EU citizens when it comes to safety and quality of living environments do not worsen? So MEP Pietikäinen, if you're here, or if not, maybe the other panelists can answer this question. So how to ensure the inequalities between EU citizens do not worsen under the EU Green Deal, and what could be the role of the EU Next Generation Fund? So maybe Susanne, you can go ahead, because I see Ms Pietikäinen might have a problem with her microphone.
Yes, I mean, first of all, I think that the fire safety, it's as I understand it, it's not something which is regulated by EU, but it's up to the member states. And we see that member states, they are not very often reviewing their fire requirements. And often when they do, it's because they have experienced a tragic fire. So doing more to review if the actual fire requirements are updated to reflect the way we are building today and the way we are renovating. I think that's something which should be done. And then make sure that it's part of the process when you are making the permit for a renovation, that fire safety is also included in this evaluation.
Thank you, Susanne. Does anyone else want to answer this question? If not, yeah, Margaret, go ahead.
It's not exactly this question, but related to it in terms of, I think that we need to do more work in creating regulations that are performance-based. This would address some of the questions that MEP Pietikäinen was talking about with flame retardants. If we have performance-based regulations, then how the performance is met is actually up to the industry. That means that they can be met with alternatives to flame retardants, for example, alternative construction methods or alternative materials that do not require the use of flame retardants if they're deemed to be a problem. Also, there was a question from Quentin de Holtz about how we can make sure that fire safety engineers become more involved in the construction process. And I think that that also has to do with performance-based regulations. If we make sure that the fire safety engineering profession is recognized as an independent engineering profession, and also open the pathway for these fire safety engineers to be designing safe buildings, not in a prescriptive manner, but in a performance-based manner, then this will help on many different levels to create both fire safe and sustainable buildings.
Thank you, Margaret. We're a bit short on time now, but we will address maybe one last question. It was addressed to you, Margaret, but other panelists, if you have an insight, please do not hesitate to follow up. So it was asked from Peter Vendeler, and he said there are intricate systems to determine which fire safety feature must be realized in buildings. This represents a balance between safety benefits and costs. Are such systems in development for the other societal objectives? How much damage to the social fabric or the water quality can be allowed before measures must be taken in the building to limit this?
Thank you, and thank you, Peter, for the question. I think this is a very key question, and at the moment, we're still in our infancy in terms of trying to understand how do we model the social impact of different types of buildings or regulations or material technology choices and so on. As I indicated in my presentation, there are some models and some interesting research that's being done to try and develop some models to understand the social life cycle of a building or of products in order to be able to put that into the context of all of the dimensions of sustainability. But this work is still just developing. So we have a lot of work to do in order to be able to include the social dimension of sustainability in a good way. And hopefully we'll see that being done in the future.
Thank you so much. So we have to close the Q&A now, but if there are any major questions left unanswered, we will be following up with the panelists and following up with the audience. So we would like to thank all our MEP hosts for being with us today for this roundtable, as well as all three speakers. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise. I would also like to extend our thanks to the audience for being with us to participate in this much needed discussion. If you are really keen on sustainability and building sustainability and fire safety, the debate continues on 29th of October at the European Fire Safety Community Digital Summit from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. CET. You can register at eufiresafety.community. You will need to be a member of the community, but it's free. So to register, please join. A whole session will be dedicated to this topic and much more. Once again, you will find the details for this summit in the chat box. And well, thank you again for being with us today. Thank you to all the panelists and to the audience. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye.